Hey guys, so I'm not an expert on this topic, but someone asked a couple days ago about like cultural appropriation and whether specific things are or aren't. And I'm not really a great person to answer that, I think, but I will talk a bit about it. And so I think there's a huge difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. Um, and I think it's very okay to appreciate a culture and take aspects from that culture and combine them into your life and they can kind of become part of your culture. I think that's part of what America is based on is I know people don't like the term melting pot always, but it really is. It's a mixture. In Portuguese, a mixtura de culturas, or maybe das culturas. But I remember talking to friends in Brazil about like it's a mixture. It's all these different things, and Brazil's similar, and so anyway, so just an interesting um idea. So maybe a cultural mixture rather than a melting pot, whatever. How Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that term. I don't really have an opinion. um, but it is one of those things where if I think it's really neat when people appreciate other cultures and I think there's a huge difference between really liking something from that culture and if someone's like, "Oh yeah, like here's some of the history behind it. You understand it and you're willing to learn and you're excited to learn." That's a huge thing. That's honorable. That's beautiful. And I think appropriation when it's negative is when you take something and don't care that it came from somewhere else and there's no appreciation where you don't care about the symbolisms and the significance to other people and other places. And I think a couple other things where it is a negative is if a culture isn't allowed to express themselves in that way. So, like different hairstyles within American culture and African American culture specifically, there are hairstyles that, dreadlocks, for example, is one where people in the US will lose jobs or not get scholarships or not be able to graduate or whatever because of their hairstyle. And that's a problem. Uh, that those are that's an example of racism built into the system, um, where white people created laws for white people based on white hair, based on white culture, and then applied them to Africans and African American people and Caribbean people, and that's several of those instances of dreadlocks have been in those situations where it doesn't. It's a law built by people from people like racism built into American culture. And so that's an example of that. But also, it's something that is really important to a lot of people. Like, I would be livid if I wasn't allowed to have my hairstyle for a specific job or those types of things. Like, no, that's not okay. So that's a big frustration. Um, but also then having white people, or I don't even really care if it's white people, but other people coming in and using the hairstyle and then getting praised for it. I think cornrows is an example of the praise, like, oh, so and so looks so great in cornrows, or box braids, or faux dreadlocks, or all of these things. And so I think that's where the issue comes from. And also, like, there are religious reasons that some people have dreadlocks, and so being respectful of those reasons is important as well. And I think that's true with things from Native American cultures, whether it's like sage or dream catchers or anything like that. Like understanding that there is a significance to a given culture is super important. I think too, I do henna, and I've had people be like, "Well, you're not from India," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." But I also learned henna in India from Indians. I learned the language. I learned to cook the food. Like, I love the culture and I love the people. And so me doing henna, I like it's not my culture, but like we're going to some Indian friend's house tonight for a birthday party. Like I don't even know if other Americans will be there, right? So like we are a part of that culture in some ways. So it's not me saying like I am Indian and I don't care what Indians say about why they do these things. This is not even saying I am Indian, but saying this is mine and Indians can't tell me anything. Like that's weird. That's not what it is. Like I genuinely love henna art and I've studied the patterns from both an Indian perspective as well as Sudanese specifically, and a little bit of Egyptian henna design and pattern work. And I like the artistry behind it. I like the craft. I've been in a block printing studio in India, and learned from professional block printers. And so like it's not me taking the culture and saying, I don't care about you people over there. I'm going to use it now and it's mine and I'm going to ignore. Like there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference. I think too, with Native American culture, there's aspects of Native American. I grew up in South Dakota, close to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and like both my half siblings grew up speaking Lakota on Rosebud, and I grew up near Pine Ridge. They grew up on Rosebud, and I may or may not be a quarter Native. There's some drama there behind that, but like there are aspects of Lakota, Oglala Lakota Sioux culture and language that I've used in artwork and different things, and I, even though I don't have papers to be Native American or have tribal affiliation, and what I would be Native, if I am Native, it'd be Blackfoot, which I'm pointing up because that's from Montana, not South Dakota. That's not even the right directions, but I would actually be Blackfoot, but the culture that I relate the most to is Oglala Lakota Sioux. And so, like, yeah, so like, there's a couple hairstyles I've done that are kind of Native inspired, but then I'm like, people, I don't think I've ever had comments with people, but I didn't see people thinking like, you're not Native, like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, it's in honor of my sister who was Native. She died during childbirth. Another example of racism built into the system and the effects of poverty. Yes, people die from childbirth. I remember talking about like not wanting, like what, like my mom had some issues with pregnancy, and like talking to some friends about like just not wanting to deal with that and not wanting to like go through it. And they're like, well, yeah, it's not usually how your mom is. It's usually how your sister's pregnancy go. And I'm like, she died. So not helpful. But yeah, like a lot of my white friends, or I should say like lighter skin friends, don't really think of that happening, but it's actually really common within brown and black communities. So anyways, another example, since we're talking about race talks, oh yeah, but like I am super connected to Native American culture because I grew up so close to it, right? And so when I use Native American culture, I'm not saying I don't care about, well, so like where I grew up, the terms drunk Indian and like Indians down by the river, homeless Indians, all of those things were really common. Like I'm not using those terms and then taking someone else, like I'm not being disrespectful to a people and then using their culture at the same time. And that's where I have issues. I think also another issue that I'm not as bothered by, but a lot of people are, is making money off of using someone else's culture. So if I were to start an Indian fabric company, there could be issues there. But again, I teach, there's one, I have an Indian student, and like her mom is Indian, her dad is Indian, but they've like said, yeah, like you can teach Indian art to her because you know more about it, because you've studied it. Like their fields, the parents' fields are not in art. So it's like there is a sense of like, I love that culture, right? And so like even for me to do art lessons to an Indian, like I talked to her, I was like, are you sure you're okay with it? And she's like, yeah, like why would you worry about it? Like this is your background. This is what you've studied. Like you studied this culture. And so anyway, so I hope that explains the difference and where I see issues with cultural appropriation, where there are people that just don't care. And that's when I have issues with it. But most of the time, people are willing to learn and love the culture and appreciate it. And that's beautiful in my opinion. So there you go. I hope that answered those questions. We'll see ya. Bye.